Hello and welcome. This lesson 7.4, we're going to talk about finding maximums and minimums and the places where graphs increase and decrease. A maximum is the highest point on a graph. It is, since it's a point, it would be listed as an ordered pair x, y. An example might be, let's say we had a parabola. The highest point on that parabola would be called the maximum. Sometimes we just abbreviate to max. Now the relative maximum is if we had, let's say, a graph that went like this. There's the y-axis and the x-axis. Now, this graph continues on up here to the right, and so, and to the left it goes down. But for the immediate area around here, we would say that is a relative maximum. Minimum is the lowest point on a graph. And again, since it's a point, it would be an ordered pair, x, y, whatever the x and y is. We'll see some examples in a moment to illustrate this. Let's say we had something like an absolute value function here. So this point right here would be the minimum. It's the lowest point. And just like with a relative maximum, a relative minimum would occur for the immediate surrounding area. That would be a relative minimum, even though this graph continues off to the left, goes down to negative infinity. For the surrounding area, this point would be the relative minimum. We say that a graph is increasing when you go from from left to right, it goes up. So we might say when a graph goes up, and that's from left to right. See a quick example of that. Look at the absolute value function. So increase, as I'm moving from right to left, from left to right, this part of the graph is increasing because it's going up. Y is moving up. Decrease. So a decrease is when the graph goes down. And again, that's as it goes down from left to right. So try to use the same example here. Same absolute value function there. This time we might say it's decreasing if, as we're moving from left to right, this part of the graph is going down as seen from left to right, even though it's got the arrow pointing the other direction. You have to imagine a little bit like you're like a little bug and you're moving down this arrow, but you have to move from left to right. And so moving left to right, we're going down here. So this part is the decreasing part of the graph. And then the constant is where the graph doesn't change. And we see this in horizontal lines. So maybe I had a graph that was something like this, went up. So there is a part there where during this section right here where it's horizontal, it doesn't graph or doesn't change. So each of these are x intervals. And you'll understand a little bit better what I'm talking about when we do some examples. So if we look here at example 1, we have to determine what is the relative maximum, the relative minimum, the increasing interval, decreasing interval, and the constant interval. So we can imagine, even though it doesn't show on there here, that at the end of these lines, they've got little arrows on them, so they continue to go up in both directions, which means that the relative maximum, there's no highest point here. And so we would say that there is none. There's no relative maximum. A relative minimum, however, you can see that there's a lowest point here. So I look over and it's 1 in x, and down 1, 2, 3, 4, -4. So that point 1, -4 would be the minimum. And so a relative minimum would be at 1, -4. And then our increasing interval, I'm going to use my highlighter to show this. The increasing interval, as we move from left to right, the part that goes up would be this part right here in the graph. And the decreasing interval, use blue for this, as I move from left to right would be this part right here of the graph. And so to show the intervals in x where this applies, the increasing interval starts at, it's the x intervals, so it starts at 1. And it continues to the right infinitely long, and so we'd say it goes to positive infinity or just infinity. And the decreasing interval, it's decreasing all the way from the left, but the leftmost point, just like the rightmost point, would be positive infinity. The leftmost point would be negative infinity. And then it continues all the way down until you get here to 1. And then a constant interval, as we remember, is the horizontal portion. Since there is no horizontal portion here, we would say constant interval, none. Let's move over and look at example 2. So in example 2, the relative maximum, relative minimum, there's no relative maximum, so we would write none. there's a relative minimum and that point would be 1, -3. And then the increasing interval, once again, let's get the highlighters out. As I move from the left to the right, I can see I'm going up at this point. And that's the increasing interval. The decreasing interval, again moving from left to right, is this part right there. So I move down to the left to the right. So it always has to be from the left to the right. And the intervals where that happens would be increasing from 1 to positive infinity and decreasing from negative infinity to 1. And constant interval, just like before, there is no horizontal part, and so there would be no constant interval in this part. Okay, in example 3, we've got a relative maximum. This will be the first one where we have a relative maximum. The lines are really faint, so it's hard to tell where they go, but let's say we go over 1, 2, 3, and up 1, 2, let's say also 3. And so it would be -3 in x, and the point up here would be +3. And so the relative maximum, the highest point for the surrounding area would be that maximum, even though we can see that it goes higher over here for this relative area, which is why I call it a relative maximum and not just like a maximum or an absolute maximum. And then let's say that it goes over 1 here and down 1, 2, 3. So this point would be the relative minimum, and that would be at the point 1, -3. And increasing interval. The points where it's going up as you move from right to left here, and then after the minimum at here as well. And then decreasing, the points where it's going down as you move from left to right would be just in this section right here. And so then you have to put what these intervals are. Increasing interval, since there's 2, we're going to use what's called a union to show that it's both of these together. So we go from -infinity till we get to -3. And then we have this U looking symbol here, and it means union. And then we go from 1 to positive infinity. And there's both of those intervals where it's increasing. And then the decreasing interval is just this blue section. And so it goes from -3 to 1. And that would be the decreasing interval. And once again, the constant interval happens where there's a horizontal stretch. Since there is not one here, we would say none. So let's take a look at example 4. With example 4, we have a number of sections. This is a graph of this is called piecewise function, because it's made of several pieces sort of glued together, if you will. Relative maximums. So higher. So you might say, well, look at this point right here. is that a maximum? Well, it's higher than the points to the left, but it's not higher than the points to the right, and so that would be not a maximum. But here, there's a relative maximum, and we would say that's at point 1, and it goes up to, we'll say 3. So the relative maximum is at the point 1, 3, and the relative minimum, we have one here, and here. And so this point is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. It's -5. And we'll say it's down 2. So -5, -2. And this one is at 1, 2, 3, 4. And it's down 1, 2, 3, let's say 4. -4. Increasing interval, so there may be a number of these here. So let's first highlight those. This section here is going down, so that's decreasing. This section, it's increasing. This section, it's increasing. Over here, it's also increasing. So we have 3 sections there. And those sections would be at from -5 to, it goes over 2 units, let's say -3. Union. -1 to 1 union, and then this is 1, 2, 3, 4, from 4 to 5. So from 4 to 5 parentheses there. And those are the increasing intervals. The decreasing intervals, it's decreasing along here because it's going down from left to right. This part's horizontal, so that's not decreasing. Then from here to here, we see it's going down. And so there's two decreasing intervals. And they would be from -infinity up to the point -5. Union. The point 1 until you get to 4. So those are the decreasing intervals. And the let me just mark the increasing interval here. And then finally the constant interval. This is the first one where we've seen one. We actually have a couple here. It's constant here, and then it's going to be constant here as well. And so the constant interval happens between -3 until you get to -1. And that's union with the point 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And where does it stop? Since that has the arrow to the right, it does not stop, which means it goes on until you get to positive infinity. And that's how we do this. Let me know if you have any questions. Please feel free to give me a call. My number for your reference, if you need it, my Google Voice number is 801-413-3363. All right, thanks you guys.